A man gives his only horse to a native girl he just met. He does it without asking for anything in return. He does it knowing it's a death sentence. The next morning, a wild stallion, a ghost of the plains, is waiting by his fence. But that's not the twist. That's not even the start of the real story. The sun was just a crack of light on the edge of the world, spilling long, bony shadows across the dusty plains of Montana. This was 1879. The land was still wild, still held secrets that could kill a man faster than a bullet. And Jake Morrison, all 38 years of him, thought he knew most of them. He was wrong. What waited by his fence that dawn wasn't just a secret. It was an impossibility. It was something that defied every law of nature, God, and common sense he'd learned, living a life harder than the rocky soil under his boots. To understand what happened that morning, we have to go back 24 hours, just one day, to a decision that should have gotten him killed. Jake was riding the fence line, a lonely job on a lonely ranch, 3,000 acres of beautiful, unforgiving country that God must have been in a mood when he made. Rolling hills of buffalo grass stretched to mountains that clawed at the sky, their peaks white with snow even in the summer heat. This land was his inheritance, claimed by his father in the homestead rush, paid for in sweat and blood. Every sunrise was a new fight. Prairie fires that ate the world, blizzards that could freeze a man solid in his saddle. Jake was carved from the same stone as this land. 6 feet tall, shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of it all. His face was a roadmap of hardship, weathered by sun and wind. His hands were scarred from barbed wire and rope burns, the story of a life with no easy answers. He was alone, had been for 3 years, ever since the fever took his wife, Sarah. The loneliness was a physical thing, a heavy stone on his chest some nights that made it hard to breathe. The future was just a long, empty line of tomorrows filled with work, and work was what kept him from going mad. It was the only meaning left when meaning was as scarce as water in a drought. His mare, a tough chestnut he called Copper, picked her way through a narrow canyon. The rock walls rose up on either side like the ribs of a dead giant, and that's when she stopped, dead still. Her ears pricked forward, every muscle in her body screaming danger. Jake squinted, his hand instinctively going to the colt at his hip. He scanned the rocks, the shadows. What had spooked his horse? A mountain lion? A bear? And then he saw her, 50 yards ahead, half hidden by a boulder. At first he thought she was a deer. She was so still, so ready to vanish. But his eyes adjusted. It was a woman, a young woman, Native American, maybe Crow from the beadwork on her doeskin dress. But Jake knew better than to guess. That kind of mistake could get you killed out here. Her hair was a waterfall of midnight black. Even from a distance, she had a wild kind of beauty, the kind that belonged to the mountains and the sky, not to a town. What got him was her stillness. She wasn't just standing in the landscape. She was part of it. Jake knew this was just a chance encounter, a ship passing in the night on this vast, empty ocean of grass. He swung down from Copper, his movements slow, deliberate, non-threatening. Out here, the wrong move, the wrong look, could be your last. Fear was the kindling for most violence, and Jake was tired of fires. The woman watched him. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, sizing him up, calculating the risk. He stopped about 20 feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to show respect. He raised his right hand, palm open, the universal sign for, "I'm not here to hurt you." Then he touched his chest. "Jake," he said, his voice clear. She studied him for a long, silent moment, a moment that stretched into an eternity. He could feel her weighing his soul. When she finally spoke, her voice was like music, with the careful cadence of someone who learned English as a second language. "I am called Ayana," she said. "It means eternal blossom." The name fit. Standing there in the dappled light, she looked like something that could bloom forever, untouched by the harsh seasons. "What brings you here, Ayana?" Jake asked, his voice gentle. She gestured to the canyon walls, and for the first time Jake saw them, the paintings, ancient images of buffalo hunts and galloping horses, warriors and spirits, scenes from a time before men like him had ever set foot on this continent. They were old, so old the rock itself seemed to be dreaming them. My grandmother's grandmother painted these, Ayana said. I come here to remember. Jake understood. He had a place like that. A small plot of land under a simple wooden cross where Sarah was buried. A place that held a piece of his soul. They talked for an hour as the sun began to dip, the air growing cool. She told him of her life, of her small band of crow who followed the old ways. And Jake, to his own surprise, found himself talking back, telling this stranger things he hadn't spoken aloud in 3 years, about the crushing loneliness, about the weight of his father's legacy. Something about her presence made it easy. It was like she gave him permission to just be still for a minute, to stop fighting. As he got ready to leave, he saw Ayana looking at Copper. Her expression wasn't envy. It was something deeper, a hollow ache. Your horse is beautiful, she said. She's a good partner, Jake said, patting Copper's neck. Been with me 8 years. Saved my life more times than I can count. Ayana nodded, that quiet understanding that passed between people who lived on the edge. A good horse wasn't just property, it was life. It was the difference between getting home and your bones getting picked clean by vultures. I had a horse once, Ayana said, her voice barely a whisper. A paint mare, with eyes like amber. She was stolen, a raid, 2 winters ago. The words just hung there in the cooling air. Jake saw the loss in her eyes, as fresh as if it had happened yesterday. He knew that pain, losing a part of yourself. And without thinking, without any calculation or logic, Jake Morrison made a decision that would shatter his world. The words left his mouth before he even knew he was going to say them. Take her. He nodded toward Copper. Ayana's eyes went wide. She looked at him, then at the horse, then back at him. Disbelief. Confusion. What? Take her, Jake repeated, his voice firm. She's yours. For a second, she looked like she would argue, like she would list all the reasons why this was insane. A white man, a stranger, giving away his only horse, his life, in the middle of nowhere. But then something changed in her face. She saw it wasn't pity. It was something else. One soul recognizing another's wound and trying, in some small way, to make it right. I cannot take your horse, she said, but the conviction was already fading from her voice. You're not taking her, Jake said. I'm giving her to you. There's a difference. He handed her the reins. Ayana approached Copper slowly, her hand outstretched. The mare, usually wary of strangers, leaned in and nuzzled her palm as if greeting an old friend. It was uncanny. Jake showed her how to adjust the stirrups, how Copper preferred a gentle hand. As he spoke, the full weight of what he was doing hit him. He wasn't just giving away a horse. He was giving away 8 years of partnership, 8 years of trust, 8 years of survival. But watching Ayana swing into the saddle, her movements as natural as breathing, he knew it was the right choice. Copper seemed to know it too, her steps lively, her ears forward. I will care for her, Ayana promised, her eyes locking with his, as if she were my own child. I know you will, Jake said. And then she was gone, riding down the canyon, melting back into the landscape she came from. Jake Morrison stood there alone, with a 3-hour walk back to his ranch house. He had just given away his lifeline. By all logic, he was a dead man. The walk back was eerie. Every rustle in the grass sounded like a snake. Every shadow seemed to hold a predator. The sun set and the world went black, a vast velvet blanket pricked with a million cold stars. He was exposed, vulnerable, a single man on foot in a land that ate single men for breakfast. The silence of his small log cabin had always been oppressive, but tonight it was different. It was peaceful. The house felt like it could finally breathe, relieved of a weight it had carried for too long. For the first time since Sarah died, Jake had done something that wasn't about pure survival. It was about something else, generosity, and the feeling was terrifying and wonderful all at once. He ate a lonely dinner of beans and bacon, the silence a calm companion. That night he slept deeper than he had in years. His dreams were not of loss, but of a woman with hair like midnight riding a chestnut mare across an endless plain, free. He woke before dawn. It was his habit. Step outside, check the weather, start the chores. The air was crisp, hinting at the coming autumn. He took maybe 10 steps toward the barn, and then he froze. Every muscle in his body went rigid. Standing by the fence of his small corral was a horse, but that's like saying a bolt of lightning is just a spark. This was a stallion, coal black, except for 4 perfect white socks, as if he'd waded through milk-white snow. He stood 17 hands high, a giant of a horse, with a chest so broad and powerful it looked like it could shatter a mountain. His eyes weren't the eyes of a dumb animal. They were intelligent, ancient, and they were looking right at Jake. Jake's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't a stray from another ranch. There was no brand, no scars from a rope or a bit. His mane and tail were long and wild, flowing like black silk in the pre-dawn breeze. This was a wild horse, a king of the wilderness, and it was standing calmly by his fence, as if it were waiting for him. Jake started to walk forward, slowly, the same way he'd approached Diana. One wrong move and this magnificent creature would be gone, a black blur vanishing into the hills. The stallion watched him come. No fear, no aggression, just a deep, profound patience. Jake reached the fence, his heart hammering against his ribs. The stallion took a step forward, stretched its powerful neck over the top rail, and breathed out, a warm puff of air against Jake's chest. Jake slowly raised a hand, scarred and calloused. The horse lowered its head and sniffed his palm, a delicate, curious touch. "Where in God's name did you come from, boy?" Jake whispered. The stallion just nickered, a low, rumbling sound that felt like an answer. This was impossible. A wild stallion of this caliber, this power. They were ghosts, legends whispered by old-timers. You didn't just walk up to one. They didn't just appear at your fence. Jake spent the next hour just standing there, a silent communion between man and myth. The horse seemed perfectly content, occasionally grazing on the grass by the posts, but always keeping Jake in its sight. The sun was climbing now. He had a choice to make. He could try to rope it, to force it into the corral, to break it. The thought felt like blasphemy. Or he could trust whatever insane forces were at play in his life. He remembered the feeling of giving copper away, the terrifying leap of faith. He decided to leap again. He walked to the corral gate, swung it wide open and stepped back. An invitation. The stallion looked at the opening, looked at Jake. Then with the unhurried dignity of a king entering his throne room, it walked straight into the corral. It wasn't captured, it had chosen. But Jake had no idea what it had chosen him for. The rest of the day was a dream. Jake went about his chores, mending fences, clearing brush, but his eyes kept returning to the corral, to the impossible black stallion that now occupied it. The horse wasn't restless. It wasn't pacing like a caged animal. It seemed content, as if it had arrived home. That evening, as the sky turned a bruised purple, Jake heard hoofbeats. He looked up. It was Ayana. She was riding Copper and leading a second horse behind her, a young crow warrior mounted on it. The family resemblance was strong. This had to be her brother. She dismounted near the corral, and her eyes immediately fell on the black stallion. She stopped breathing. The look on her face wasn't just surprise. It was reverence, awe. "His name is Windrunner," she said, her voice a hushed whisper. "He has never allowed a human to touch him." Jake's world tilted on its axis. He looked from Ayana to the stallion and back again. The pieces of a puzzle he didn't even know existed were starting to slam into place. You know this horse?" The young warrior with her spoke for the first time. His English was rough, but his meaning was crystal clear. "Windrunner is a legend, a spirit. He leads the wild herds between here and the Yellowstone. No man has ever gotten closer than a rifle shot. A spirit horse, a legend, and it was standing in his corral, calmly chewing on his hay." Ayana walked to the fence. The stallion, Windrunner, walked to meet her, but his eyes stayed on Jake. "My grandmother told stories of him," Ayana said. "She said he is a gift from the Great Spirit, that he appears when the balance of the world has been broken and a great kindness has been done to restore it." A chill, completely unrelated to the evening air, snaked its way down Jake's spine. Are you saying this horse is here because of what I did? Because I gave you copper?" Ayana didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached into a leather pouch at her belt. She pulled out something small, wrapped in soft deerskin. She handed it to Jake. His fingers, clumsy and thick, unwrapped it. Lying in his palm was a piece of turquoise, carved into the perfect shape of a running horse. The craftsmanship was breathtaking. The stone was a deep, impossible blue-green, seeming to glow with an inner light. "This belonged to my grandmother's grandmother," Ayana said softly, "the one who painted the canyon walls. She said the stone has its own spirit. It would know when to find its way to the right person." Jake stared at the stone, then at Ayana, then at the living legend in his corral. His mind was reeling. This was too much. "I can't take this, Ayana. It's, it's a part of your family. It's too important." "My family believes some gifts are not meant to be kept," the young warrior said, his eyes wise beyond his years. "They are meant to travel, to carry their medicine where it is needed most." As if on cue, Windrunner stepped forward. He pushed his great head over the fence, right toward Jake. His nostrils flared, taking in his scent. Then, with a tenderness that seemed impossible for such a powerful creature, the stallion touched his muzzle to Jake's chest, directly over his heart. The contact lasted only a second, but in that second, something inside Jake shifted. That old, familiar stone of loneliness, the one he'd carried for 3 long years, didn't disappear. It shattered. In its place, a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling not of grief, but of possibility. "He has chosen you," Ayana said, her voice filled with wonder. "The spirits have answered your gift. You gave from your heart, without asking for reward. And so, they have given you a gift that cannot be measured." Jake looked at the wild stallion, at the ancient turquoise in his hand, at the woman whose path had so strangely crossed his. His simple life of hardship and survival was over. He had stepped into a legend. But legends have a way of attracting monsters. And Jake Morrison was about to find out that the greatest gift of his life would also put him in the crosshairs of the most dangerous man in the territory. The balance had been restored, but the darkness was about to push back. The weeks that followed were a slow, careful dance. Building a relationship with Windrunner wasn't like breaking a horse. You didn't break a spirit. You earned its trust. It was a partnership, not a conquest. The stallion allowed Jake to approach, to touch him, to place a halter over his head. But it was always on the horse's terms. It was an offering, not a submission. And the horse was more than just flesh and blood. Jake had never seen anything like it. Windrunner could run for hours and not break a sweat, his powerful legs eating up the miles. He moved over treacherous, rocky ground with the grace of a mountain goat. He had a sixth sense for danger, alerting Jake to a hidden rattlesnake or a coming storm long before Jake himself was aware of it. Riding him was like riding the wind itself. It was a taste of pure, untamed freedom. But Windrunner's presence brought more than just a magnificent mount to the ranch. It changed the land itself. Wild animals, once scarce, began to return. Deer grazed openly in the pastures. A golden eagle built a nest in a tall pine near the house. It was as if the stallion was an ambassador, declaring this small patch of land a sanctuary, a bridge between the world of men and the wild. Ayana and her brother, whose name was Little Wolf, became frequent visitors. They would arrive unannounced, sometimes alone, sometimes with others from their band, and their presence never felt like an intrusion. It felt right. Jake found himself opening up, sharing stories and laughter. He was learning a new way of seeing the world. Through them, he learned the secret language of the land, which plants healed, which ones poisoned, how to read the clouds, how to find water. In return, he shared his own knowledge of crop rotation, of building to withstand the prairie winds, of preserving food for the harsh winters. It wasn't charity, it was an exchange, a partnership. 2 different worlds, 2 different kinds of knowledge, weaving together to make something stronger than either one was alone. The ranch, once a monument to his loneliness, was becoming a crossroads, a place of hope. And Jake, who had been a man slowly dying inside, was coming back to life. He didn't know it, but that life, that hope, was about to be threatened. Because stories of the ghost stallion and the rancher who rode him had begun to travel. And they had reached the ears of a man who believed that anything beautiful, anything powerful, Anything good existed for one reason and one reason only, for him to take it. His name was Sheriff Blackwood. He wasn't a lawman. He was a tyrant who wore a tin star. He ran the nearby settlement of Redemption with an iron fist and a greedy heart. Blackwood was a man who saw the world in terms of possessions. He saw the land not as a living thing, but as something to be carved up and sold. He saw the native tribes not as people, but as obstacles. And when he heard the whispers about a black stallion that couldn't be caught, a horse that was more spirit than animal, his eyes lit up with a possessive fire. He wanted it, and Sheriff Blackwood always got what he wanted. He arrived on a blistering Tuesday afternoon, a cloud of dust on the horizon that resolved itself into a posse of 5 men, Blackwood at their head. He was a big man, running to fat, with a cruel sneer permanently etched on his face. His silver star was polished, but his eyes were dull and muddy. He rode right up to the corral where Windrunner stood, watching the newcomers with an unnerving calm. "Morrison," Blackwood barked, not bothering with pleasantries. "Heard you came into a fine piece of horseflesh." Jake walked out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, his posture deceptively relaxed. But inside, every nerve was on fire. He knew this man by reputation. "He's not for sale, Sheriff," Jake said, his voice level. Blackwood laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Son, everything's for sale, and I ain't asking to buy. That there is a wild animal, property of the United States government. As the law in these parts, I'm here to confiscate it." It was a lie, and they both knew it. A wild horse belonged to whoever could tame it. "He's not wild anymore," Jake said. "He chose to be here." "Horses don't choose," Blackwood sneered, his eyes flicking over to Ayanna and Little Wolf, who had emerged from the ranch house and were standing silently on the porch. "And I see you've got yourself some other stray critters. You best be careful, Morrison. The company you keep says a lot about a man." The threat was plain. "The company I keep is my business," Jake said, his voice hardening. "This ranch is my business, and this horse is not leaving it." Blackwood's face purpled with rage. He was not a man used to being told no. He swung down from his horse, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. His deputies fanned out, their expressions a mix of boredom and menace. "I think you misunderstand the situation," Blackwood said, his voice low and dangerous. "I am the law. I am giving you a direct order to turn over that animal. You refuse, you're obstructing justice. And down in Redemption, we have a special tree for men who obstruct justice." The air grew thick and heavy. The world seemed to hold its breath. A bead of sweat trickled down Jake's temple. He was outgunned, 5-1. If you didn't count Little Wolf, who stood on the porch motionless as a statue, but with the deadly stillness of a coiled snake. Jake looked at Windrunner. The stallion met his gaze, unafraid. He looked at Ayanna, her face a mask of calm defiance. He had found something here worth fighting for. Something more than just a horse, a community, a future. He wasn't going to let this bloated tyrant take it away. "You're not the law, Blackwood," Jake said, his voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even himself. "You're just a bully with a badge, and you're not welcome on my land." Blackwood's eyes narrowed to slits. The sneer dropped from his face, replaced by a look of pure, murderous rage. "That's it then," he hissed. He drew his pistol. "Boys, the horse is ours. If he gets in the way, shoot him." The world exploded. Just as Blackwood's deputies raised their rifles, Little Wolf moved. He wasn't just fast. He was a blur. A knife appeared in his hand, as if from thin air, and it flew across the yard, burying itself in the arm of the deputy closest to him. The man screamed and dropped his rifle. It was the only distraction Jake needed. He vaulted over the corral fence, landing on Windrunner's bare back. He didn't need a saddle. He didn't need reins. He grabbed a handful of the stallion's long mane. "Go!" he yelled. Windrunner didn't need to be told twice. He exploded from a standstill into a full gallop. He cleared the 5-foot corral fence in a single, effortless leap, a creature of myth taking flight. A gunshot cracked the air, then another. Bullets whizzed past Jake's ear. They were clear, they were running. Windrunner's hooves thundered against the hard-packed earth, a sound like war drums. Jake leaned low over the stallion's neck, the wind whipping tears from his eyes. He glanced back. Blackwood and his men were scrambling for their horses, their faces twisted in fury. The chase was on, but they weren't just chasing a man on a horse. They were chasing a legend, and they were about to find out what that really meant. Windrunner didn't run on trails, he made his own. He charged straight for the rocky foothills, a place where no sane man would take a horse at a gallop. The ground was a treacherous maze of boulders, ravines, and thorny scrub. For Windrunner, it was a playground. He moved with a preternatural grace, leaping over crevices that should have been impossible, weaving through rock formations with the agility of a cat. Jake could only hold on, trusting the spirit beneath him, feeling the incredible power, the raw, untamed heart of the wild. The deputies' horses were good, but they were just horses. They stumbled and slowed, their riders cursing as they tried to navigate the deadly terrain. Soon their shouts faded into the distance. Jake and Windrunner were alone, climbing higher into the mountains, vanishing into the wilderness that was their true home. He had escaped, for now, but he knew this was far from over. Blackwood wasn't a man who gave up. He wouldn't just let this go. He would hunt Jake to the ends of the earth. Jake was now a fugitive, an outlaw, all because he refused to give up a gift. He found a hidden box canyon with a spring and a patch of grass, a place so secluded you could only find it if you already knew it was there. He knew Windrunner would be safe. He let the stallion drink, his magnificent sides heaving. Though he didn't seem tired, he seemed exhilarated. As dusk fell, Jake sat by the small fire he'd managed to build, the weight of his situation crashing down on him. He had no food, no supplies, and a corrupt sheriff with a posse hunting him. He had saved the horse, but he might have just doomed himself, Ayanna, and Little Wolf. What had he done? Just as despair began to set in, he heard a soft sound, a twig snapping. He shot to his feet, grabbing a rock, his heart pounding. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was Ayanna. She was alone, carrying a small pack. She walked into the firelight, her face calm and determined. "I told you I would care for him as my own child," she said, nodding toward Windrunner. "That means I care for his rider too." Relief washed over Jake so intensely his knees felt weak. "How did you find me?" She smiled a small, knowing smile. "The land shows the way to those who listen, and Little Wolf is tracking the sheriff. We need to know his plan." She handed him bread and dried meat from her pack. It was the best meal he'd ever eaten. "Blackwood won't stop," Jake said grimly. "He'll tear the whole territory apart looking for me." "I know," Ayanna said. Her expression grew serious. "Which is why we cannot just run. We have to fight. Blackwood is a sickness, and you do not run from a sickness. You cut it out." Jake looked at her, at the fire in her eyes. She was right. Hiding wouldn't solve anything. It would only delay the inevitable. But how could they fight a man who held all the power? A man who was the law? "Little Wolf and my people have been watching Blackwood for a long time," Ayanna said, as if reading his mind. "He is more than just a bully. He is a thief. He uses his badge to scare settlers off their land, then buys it for pennies on the dollar through a dummy corporation. He forges documents. He steals cattle from our people and sells them across the border. He is a spider in the center of a very dark web." Suddenly, this was about so much more than one horse. It was about land, about justice, about the soul of the entire territory. "The people in town are too scared to speak up," Ayanna continued. "He has everyone in his pocket, but we have heard whispers. A territorial marshal is coming, sent from the capital to investigate rumors of corruption and redemption." A spark of hope ignited in Jake's chest. "A marshal? He is one man. He will need proof, hard proof. Blackwood is smart. He covers his tracks." They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling, Windrunner's soft breathing, a steady rhythm in the dark. And then an idea began to form in Jake's mind. A wild, dangerous idea, a plan so audacious it might just work. Blackwood was obsessed. He was arrogant. He thought he was untouchable. They could use that against him. They could use his greed as the bait. And the bait would be Windrunner. "What if," Jake said slowly, his heart beginning to race, "what if we give him exactly what he wants? Ayana looked at him, her dark eyes searching his face, understanding dawning. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her lips. You want to set a trap? A big one, Jake confirmed. We'll let word get out that I'm willing to trade the horse for safe passage. A meeting, somewhere public. We'll make sure the new marshal hears about it. When Blackwood shows up to take the horse, we get him to expose himself, to confess. It was a desperate gamble. If it failed, Jake would be dead, and Blackwood would have the horse and everything else. But if it worked, they could cut the sickness out for good. It is dangerous, Ayana said. Living out here is dangerous, Jake countered. I'd rather face the danger on my feet than run from it for the rest of my life. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Little Wolf will get word to the marshal. My people will watch Blackwood's every move. We will be your eyes and ears. The plan was set. The trap would be sprung in 3 days, in the center of Redemption, the town Blackwood thought he owned. Jake looked over at Windrunner, who stood silhouetted against the starry sky, a magnificent creature of legend. He had been a gift. Now he was their only weapon, a gift of the spirit world, about to be used to bring a devil to justice. The next 3 days were the longest of Jake's life. Little Wolf, moving like a ghost through the territory, confirmed the territorial marshal, a man named Elias Thorne, was in the next county and was indeed sniffing around Blackwood's affairs. He got a message to him, a cryptic note about a public meeting and a corrupt sheriff about to show his hand. It was a long shot, but it was their only one. Ayana's people acted as a network of spies, reporting on Blackwood's movements. The sheriff was in a rage, tearing his own town apart looking for Jake. He was obsessed, just as they'd hoped. When he received Jake's message, passed through a drunkard at the saloon, offering to trade the horse for amnesty, he jumped at it. His pride wouldn't let him imagine it could be a trap. The meeting was set for high noon in the dusty main street of Redemption. The morning of the 3rd day, Jake rode Windrunner out of the mountains. He felt a strange calm settle over him. This was it. It would either be the end of Blackwood or the end of him. As he rode, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. From a lonely, grieving man to a fugitive fighting for justice. All because he gave away a horse. Ayana was right. Generosity wasn't just an act. It was a force that could rebalance the world. Today he was praying that force was strong enough to face down 5 guns. He reached the outskirts of Redemption and dismounted, handing the reins, though he didn't use them, to Little Wolf, who had appeared silently at his side. If this goes wrong, Jake said, get him out of here. Don't let Blackwood get his hands on him. Little Wolf nodded, his face grim. He will be safe. Be careful, my friend. Jake walked into town alone, unarmed. His pistol was tucked away in his saddlebag. That was part of the plan. He had to look defeated. The main street was quiet. Too quiet. Townspeople peeked from behind curtains, their faces pale with fear. They knew something was about to happen. Sheriff Blackwood and his 4 deputies stood waiting in front of the saloon. Blackwood had a triumphant, greasy smile on his face. Morrison, he boomed. Glad to see you've come to your senses. Where's my horse? He's safe, Jake said, stopping about 30 feet away. Let's talk terms. You sign a piece of paper right here, right now, saying all charges are dropped and I'm free to go. Then I'll tell you where he is. Blackwood laughed. You're in no position to make demands. But fine. I'm a reasonable man. He swaggered forward, holding out a piece of paper. Jake knew it was meaningless. Blackwood would shoot him in the back the second he got what he wanted. You caused me a lot of trouble, Morrison, Blackwood said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as he got closer. Chasing you all over God's creation, wasting my time when I have important business to attend to. This was it, the moment of truth. Jake needed to get him talking. What kind of business is so important? Jake asked, playing dumb. More important than a horse like that? Blackwood's ego, poked and prodded, began to swell. He couldn't resist bragging. That horse is just the beginning, he sneered. A trophy. My real business is this land, this whole valley. People like you come and you sweat and you bleed for a little patch of dirt. You don't see the big picture. I do. A few forged signatures here, a little intimidation there, and it's all mine. The railroad's coming through next year. I'll be the richest man in Montana." He was practically glowing with pride at his own wickedness. "You're admitting to fraud? To theft?" Jake pressed, raising his voice just enough. "Admitting?" Blackwood chuckled. "Who are you going to tell? In this town, my word is law. My word is truth. I could shoot you down in the street right now and say you drew on me, and these fine people," he gestured to the shuttered windows, "would swear to it. I own this town." "Not anymore, you don't." The new voice was cold, hard, and came from the shadows of the alleyway beside the saloon. A man stepped out. He was tall and lean, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen everything. He wore a dusty coat, and on his vest was the unmistakable star of a U.S. territorial marshal. Sheriff Blackwood froze. The color drained from his face. He looked like a hog that had just seen the butcher's knife. "Marshal Thorne," Blackwood stammered. "What a what a surprise. I was just conducting an arrest." "Really?" Thorne said, his voice dripping with ice. "Looked to me like you were confessing to about a dozen felonies. I'd say that's obstruction of justice, land fraud, cattle rustling, and conspiracy for starters. You and your boys are under arrest." For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence, then chaos. Blackwood was a cornered rat, and cornered rats bite. He wasn't going to be taken alive. "Kill them all!" he screamed, his hand flying to his gun. But he never cleared the leather. An arrow, silent and swift, sprouted from his gun hand, pinning it to his side. He shrieked in pain. Little Wolf, perched on the roof of the general store, had notched a second arrow before the first had even hit. The deputies, reacting a second too late, drew their weapons. Marshal Thorne was faster. His pistol barked twice, and two of the deputies crumpled to the dust. A third deputy got a shot off, aimed at the marshal. But before the bullet could find its mark, a figure moved between them. It was Jake. He tackled Thorne, throwing them both to the ground as the shot whistled over their heads. The last remaining deputy stared in shock, giving Little Wolf the opening he needed. A second arrow took him in the shoulder, and he went down, howling. It was over in less than 5 seconds. The street was silent again, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood. Blackwood was on his knees, clutching his ruined hand, whimpering. His reign of terror was over. Marshal Thorne got to his feet, brushing the dust off his coat. He looked at Jake with a newfound respect. "You took a hell of a risk, Morrison." "Seemed worth it," Jake said, his heart still hammering. Just then, a sound came from the end of the street. The thunder of hooves. Windrunner, with Ayanna on his back, galloped into town. The stallion came to a stop beside Jake, nuzzling his shoulder as if to ask if he was all right. The townspeople, finally brave enough to come out of their homes, gathered around, their faces a mixture of fear, shock, and dawning hope. They had witnessed a reckoning. They had seen a legend save them. In the years that followed, everything changed. The story of Jake Morrison and the ghost stallion became legend, but the reality was even better. With Blackwood gone, redemption was reborn. Marshal Thorne, using Jake's and Ayanna's testimony, rooted out the rest of the corruption. The ranch, once Jake's lonely outpost, became the heart of the valley. Ayanna's people and the settlers, once separated by fear, began to build bridges. They traded, they worked together, they learned from each other. The ranch became a model for what the West could be. Not a place of conquest, but a place of community. Jake and Ayanna were married the following spring, in a ceremony that blended the traditions of both their peoples. Windrunner himself was the guest of honor, a garland of wildflowers woven into his mane. The ranch prospered. Jake and Ayanna had children who grew up with the wisdom of two cultures, at home in a ranch house or a teepee, able to read a book or the tracks of a wolf. Windrunner remained a part of their lives, a constant, wild presence. He was never truly broken, never fully tamed, but he was always loyal. He became a symbol of the untamable spirit of the land and of the magic that happens when you give without expecting anything in return. Jake lived a long, full life. He saw the frontier close, saw the world change in ways he could never have imagined. But he never forgot the lesson he learned that one fateful day. He had given away a horse, a simple act of kindness to a stranger in a canyon. In return, he hadn't just gotten a better horse. He had gotten a partner, a community, a family. He had gotten a whole new life. The carved turquoise horse Ayana had given him sat on their mantelpiece for the rest of his days, a reminder that the greatest gifts don't come from taking, but from letting go. They come when you open your heart to the wild, impossible magic of the world. And sometimes, if you're very, very lucky, that magic shows up at your fence at dawn, waiting to change your life forever. If you enjoyed this story of how one act of kindness can change the world, do me a favor. Take a second and hit that subscribe button and make sure to turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the incredible story we're breaking down next. Thanks for watching.